I've already introduced Dr. Matshabaphala, who is also a former research colleague of mine from long time ago. And he has agreed to address us on the subject of South Africa since independence. So, Johnny, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Robin, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'll take it we're all saying good evening to you.
Yes. So I wonder if you can see what's on my screen.
Yes, yes, that's fine.
Yeah, that's okay. So it's clear.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Thanks. As Robin has indicated, my name is Johnny Matshabaphala, based at the Wits Business School. And then I was requested to do a presentation on South Africa since independence. And then I termed the presentation an appreciative inquiry. And for the purpose of this presentation, I chose to look at South Africa before independence. And looking at South Africa from the economic capabilities point of view, that before independence, its economy was based on primary sectors of the economy, that would be agriculture, mining, and all of these activities are still on course in the country. There would be the secondary sectors, tertiary and quaternary sectors of the economy. The problem with this system was that before independence, this economy was on separate development. I mean, mainly benefiting the white sectors of the economy. And then 80% of the land ownership by then was owned by a minority, and then only 13% for the majority of the people in the country. So that's part of our legacy. On the human capabilities side, we had good quality health facilities and services and good quality education, but for the white population in the country, and then, of course, with an inferior education for the African communities. We had segregated sports and recreation communities. And then when it comes to the governance capabilities, South Africa had what you call ancient traditional systems. That is what you refer to as a pre-contact systems of governance. And these systems have continued to survive the colonial overlay. Yes, we inherited these systems and they continue to exist. They existed under apartheid. And even today, we still have these traditional systems of governance, meaning that they're quite popular, not only in South Africa, but even in other African countries. And then in our history, we're talking of the apartheid system that was overseen by a white minority populace. And then this was buttressed by their acolytes, where we even had homeland systems where people were pigeonholed into ethnic and tribal categories. And these systems and these areas or enclaves served as reserves for cheap labor. And basically the whole governance architecture in the country was based on divide and rule. And then, of course, there was this discrimination against the vulnerable categories in society on the grounds of race, ethnicity, women, and children. So it's a part of our legacy. On protection capabilities, we're looking at a largely police state, the apartheid South Africa, which was meant to protect the interests of the white minority populace. And then, of course, there were systems in place for the protection of people in general and the ecosystem in particular. So as I indicated, I'm going to opt for an appreciative inquiry model for this discussion. This is the instrument I use with my students whenever we engage on themes in most of our modules as an epistemological tool. It is a meta-narrative on the narratives about the South African story. So it is it's a story, and then it is in these stories where we find the stories of affirmation, where the government believes that it is doing quite well. And then, of course, there are counter narratives that are saying that no, there are areas of improvement, you're not doing well, and there are opportunities for you to improve what's going on what's going on in South Africa. So it's called the 5D model. It's based on the 5Ds, as you can see in my underlined Ds. The first D, there's the definition. That is my focus area, which will be the Republic of South Africa after independence. What are the stories? What are the South Africans saying about what's happening in the country after independence? So it's a multiplicity of voices there. Those who are affirming the South African story, and then those who are coming with counter narratives, as it were. And then the second D is discovery. That is, students usually would be requested to share a moment in time where they see South Africa at its best. So here we'll be looking at South Africa after independence at its best. What are its milestones, some of its greatest achievements since independence? And then the third D, instead of using the strategy nomenclature of threats and weaknesses, we call this the wishes for the future. That is the improvements that South Africans like to see. And as maybe also in the affirmation stories and also the counter narratives. Affirmation, where the government believes that it is doing well and it hopes to improve on what it has already achieved. And then there'll be those who are coming with counter narratives, offering even alternative worldviews, more especially now that we are in the election season. We see political parties stepping up to the plate to offer alternative visions and alternative stories on what they think can take the South Africa forward. The fourth D is designing. That is now planning for this new South Africa after the new South Africa. You see, so there are people who believe that this will be a very critical election, you see, where we definitely have to recalibrate and rebuild our country anew. So people are planning for improvements. And then these planning for improvements requires management. And then the last D there looks at delivery. Now the implementation of these envisioned improvements, which require leadership. I'll talk about those towards the close of the presentation. And this presentation looks at the performance of the South African government, making use of the Mo Ibrahim Index of Governance. He's a businessman, one of the rich businessmen in Africa, and then he looks at this index of governance with a lens on the provision and operationalization of public goods by the state and other actors, how governments are performing and other leaders are performing when it comes to the delivery of public goods. This will be looked at from a political point of view, where we'll be looking at the delivery of good governance in the polity. How is South African government doing? And then from the social platforms, we're going to look at how the government is performing with reference to the enhancement of a people's quality of life. Has there been improvement after independence on the people's quality of life? And then is there growth in terms of economic citizenship for the majority of the populace in the country? And then, of course, we're also looking at the environmental when it looks at ecological diversity. That is people taking care of their own environment. Now, developing the Mo Ibrahim framework further, we're looking at the foundations for economic opportunity. How are the opportunities for people in South Africa after independence? More especially with reference to looking at the delivery of economic goods. Human development, how is South Africa performing? Security and the rule of law, how is South Africa doing? And then again, participation, rights, and inclusion for those who were historically disenfranchised as a social echelon. We will then commence with the foundations for economic opportunity, where we're looking at the best practices and experiences by the people of South Africa after independence. That is now with reference to foundations for economic opportunity. Are there economic opportunities in the country? So on the governance front, we notice that there is support for for emerging entrepreneurs by the government departments in the economic cluster and even companies supporting those who were excluded, especially young women who are even abandoning their own professions and careers to go into primary sectors of the economy like agriculture, establishing farms and farming activities and programs, employing quite a number of people, young women employing. You find in one situation, a young woman is employing 500 people in some of the rural economic systems, as it were. So generally, the situation in the country presents an ideal climate for entrepreneurship. Those who like to participate in the economy, being entrepreneurial, are given an opportunity to do so. So, and then again, on the governance frontier, yet again, there are good governance bodies like your Auditor General that oversee overall good governance insofar as economic activity is concerned. But then again, this presentation also does acknowledge that there are opportunities for improvement where the government has not been doing well, where other voices in the meta-narrative are saying there is a need for more inclusivity in the economy. We are not doing enough. There is a need for more opportunities for those who still remain excluded, more especially young people. Looking at the business environment, the environment is seen as an ideal environment for leveraging opportunities, where this is actually manifest in the immigrant communities, also traveling from as far as Ethiopia, Nigeria, Sudan, Uganda, passing through all the borders, rivers, and all that to come and settle in South Africa, because the environment so allows. So immigrant communities are also seeking opportunities, and in every town, they are running businesses in those towns. Although occasionally there will be those tensions between the local communities and the immigrant communities. I mean, it's all about the fight for resources. So there is also a growth of interest by foreign investors. But then again, on the opportunities for improvement, it's noted that there is a need for the creation of an enabling environment for investment. I mean, there's quite a number of concerns that the investors are raising in South Africa. And here I'm looking at also another example of neighboring countries like Botswana, where they provide what you call tax holiday for investors, where you're not taxed for so long as you invest in the country and employ the local communities. So that in itself, I mean, we found to be quite one of an interesting models when we went out on a global study tour to neighboring countries and other countries abroad. And then again, there is also a need for user-friendly regulations, because there are people who do complain that, yes, we want to invest in your country, but there is too much over-regulation, you see, which is regarded as not so friendly for the investor community. Then there is the challenge of infrastructure. Today, we're seeing, as one of the best practices and experiences, the public and the private sector joining forces in the rehabilitation and the development of the infrastructure. Mining companies are helping rehabilitate the infrastructure where they are operating, because most of their vehicles are damaging the road infrastructure. The motor car assembly plants and companies are also coming to the party to help rebuild the infrastructure. And then we're seeing similar efforts even in bigger metros like Johannesburg, Cape Town, where people are joining forces to improve on the infrastructure. So opportunities for improvements there point in the direction of the need for the government to continue with the assistance of the private sector, intensify the rehabilitation and development of the infrastructure. And then, of course, with the environment allowing, we're seeing other local government entities and structures attracted to the idea of investing in rural communities. And many people saw it as a possibility that can be realized, more especially during the wake of the pandemic, where people had to go back to their homes and stay there for quite some time. And then they realized that if you could have a good infrastructure and investment in our rural areas, we can as well stay in our areas rather than go to the big cities looking for better opportunities. So some of the companies have noticed that, and then they are already establishing businesses in those enclaves. So the challenge here is for the government to incentivize such investments for rural development. Now, on the human development, the best practices then experiences point in the direction of health. That generally today, people in the country are now having access to healthcare services, access to quality healthcare services. And what's happening here is that not only are we attracting people, more especially immigrant communities from the neighboring countries for business opportunities, we find ourselves having to carry the burden of the healthcare responsibilities of the neighboring countries. So people coming from the neighboring countries do come to South Africa for actually even healthcare because of the collapsed infrastructure and systems in our neighboring countries. Being that as it may, this discussion also does acknowledge that there's still room for improvement. There's an opportunity for improvement in the domain of health. There is a need for the improvement of the quality of the healthcare services themselves, because there is actually a gradual decline in places. There is also a need for resourcing of healthcare services to provide resources, and also the improvement of the healthcare infrastructure is quite important. So the government needs to work hard on that front. Insofar as education is concerned, we are seeing people now are having access to education. And then I say others are having access to quality education. We do have world-class universities in the country where we're attracting students from Europe, the better parts of the African continent, and even the United States, more especially the leading research universities in the country. And then, of course, with some good rankings in some situations. So we do, of course, as I've just said, have world-class higher education institutions. But then again, insofar as the need for improvements for education, we notice that there is a need for the improvement of the quality of education. There had been quite a number of concerns about the quality of our education in South Africa. And then I'm seeing the government hard at work, to try and benchmark against some of the best practices in education, from basic education to higher education. And again, there is also a need for more higher education institutions, because we only have about 26 universities in the whole country. It's always a crisis. I mean, when young people graduate high school and then they can't find spaces in higher education due to the shortage of such institutions. So there is a need for the resourcing of research as well in higher education. On social protection, we notice that South Africa has got a social security system, at least protecting people against deprivation and poverty. So we're doing well on that front. And then, of course, there are voices that are saying that that's not enough. We need to even introduce a basic income grant that will actually make for enhancement of the quality of life of the people. For sustainable environments, the new government, the government after independence led by Nelson Mandela, actually came with a program for sustainable livelihoods, where they build sustainable human settlements for the restoration of people's lives of dignity. There are concerns for ecological diversity. Today, our president was addressing a conference not far from where I am on the importance of protecting our ecosystems. We have very good organs of civil society that are pushing for environmental activism for the protection of the environment. And on the improvements, there is a need for environmental stewardship, leadership, and ownership of the ecosystems and the community of life. We can do better on that front. And then we go on to security and the rule of law. On the best practices and experiences, we start with security and safety for business, where we observe that there is security and safety for the well-resourced people and also well-resourced businesses. Yes, those who have money, they will tell you that yes, they do experience their own security, but then they have their own security concerns. And more especially those who can afford the private security. So what the government can do to improve there is that there is a need for protection for all people, not some people, but for all people. And then there is a need for protection of businesses. Because of vandalism, whenever there are demonstrations, people do loot, vandalize businesses, and that's not good for a country's economic life. On the rule of law, South Africa has got a globally respected constitution, and it's got this architecture for the rule of law that is in place with Chapter 9 institutions that are there to ensure that there is governance performance, more especially your governance performance index, more especially in the area of local government. And South Africa is also regarded as an important player in the global peace efforts. So then again, on the rule of law, we notice that there is a need for ensuring that there is observance of the rule of law, because there's been a dropping of the ball in some situations. And then again, also ensuring that there is observance of the bylaws, because that's quite important, I mean, for a developing country like South Africa. Accountability and transparency. We notice that there are pockets of excellence in the various sectors of the polity and the private sector, which are suggestive of good governance. I mean, we do acknowledge, that's what I'm saying, as an appreciative inquiry, we first acknowledge where things are working well, and then again, also looking at the things that will need to be improved on. We need to consolidate the good governance architecture, especially in government departments, state-owned entities, and even in the private sector, because there's been an observation that there's been issues of corruption even in the private sector as well. Anti-corruption initiatives. There's been situations where we had conscientious individuals and organizations that have decided to step up to the plate to expose malfeasance in the public and the private sectors. Although in some situations it came at a cost, where some people had lost their lives for exposing corruption in the system. So as an opportunity for improvement, we're looking at the need to strengthen the anti-corruption initiatives and strengthen the anti-corruption architecture and even protect the whistleblowers. The last domain there is that of the participation rights and inclusion. On the best practices and experiences, we noticed that on participation, currently we are in the election season and people are participating in the electoral processes. It's a multi-party democracy. individuals and parties are participating in the polity. I mean, everyone is participating. There is excitement and there is tension, which goes with every election season in every part of the world. But then again, we also notice that still on participation, we need to encourage tolerance for difference. We need an open system paradigm for the polity, and also the criminalization of political intolerance in the country, because there would be those moments where people are less tolerant of different views, and then ending up in violence and even loss of lives in other parts of the country. On the right, we notice that the historically excluded in the realm of education, health, and work, people are now given their rights to education, the right to health, and even the right to work. And these rights are even extended to the immigrant communities. I mean, those who are in South Africa for one reason or the other, they are protected and have got the right to education, health, and work. There is freedom of expression in South Africa and freedom of association. People can join any political party, organization, and so forth. But then again, there is a need also for the respect of the rights, for the rights of other people, because sometimes people do ignore that, and the respect for the rights of the vulnerable in society, and also the right to education, or rather education of people on their rights, what it means to have your rights without infringing on the rights of others. On inclusion, we're seeing that those historically disenfranchised are now included, and also the people with special needs. The Constitution also does accommodate the people with special needs so that they are also part of the economic system. And then, so the challenge there is that there is a need for enforcement of legislation regarding the historically excluded people and the inclusion of people with special needs, but especially in the economy. On diversity, there is protection of LGBTQI+ by the Constitution. There is diversity in the workplace, and then so much so that South Africa has actually even become a sanctuary for those persecuted in their countries and in the region. We have seen people who have run away because of their gender orientation. They've run to South Africa, which they regard as a safe haven for people who are persecuted because of their sexual orientation. But then again, we also sit with a challenge in the country where there is a need for enforcement of legislation that relates to the LGBTQI communities, because they do get victimized in some communities. So towards now concluding, I'm saying, in relation to the opportunities for improvement, there is a need for leadership and management. These are the voices that are coming out as people are preparing for the elections. There is a need for leadership, and then here we're talking about leadership redefined. So what do we mean by leadership and management here? That it's all about people. Leadership has got to show a concern for people. So South Africans are looking at the type of leadership that is really concerned with their well-being. So then we're looking at the direction. I mean, that's one of the functions of leadership. People are looking for the type of leadership that will provide them with guidance, the type of leadership that will model the way towards the grand national narrative, right? Towards the new national order. Yes. And then again, there is a need for the leadership that will correct the mistakes that we have committed as a country, managing conflict, and also the leadership that will influence society towards South Africa as a nation, as a family. And then again, an inspiring leadership that gives hope for the future. But then again, our challenges are also a call for good governance. where we need to set the standards for good governance, where if need be, redesign our governance architecture, and also ensure that there is a measurement of the standards that we have set in our planning for a new order through use of monitoring and evaluation instruments. Now, leadership redefined. South Africans are saying we need leadership, and then the debates are pointing in the direction of these two components of the anatomy of leadership. That most commentators in the polity today, as we build towards the elections, people are saying that we want character. We want women, men and women of character and competence. So we're going to listen to their stories when it comes to their philosophy. What are their ethics? What are their values, these leaders? And then what are their qualities? I mean, this is what people are saying. There were deficiencies on the leadership architecture and infrastructure. We looking for men and women of integrity, credibility, and who do care about the well-being of the people of this country. In one of the programs I teach at the Wits University, I invited a guest lecturer who happened to have been a vice chancellor, a principal of a university, our neighboring university, University of Johannesburg. And he was guest lecturing on a module on African leadership in the business domain. And he came with an observation that we are facing problems in our country because we've given the leadership responsibility to the people who do not have knowledge. So his argument is coming from an engineering background. And then his argument was that people who do not have knowledge must not lead. And quite a number of students did agree with him that we really do need now men and women of character and competence, people who have knowledge about the whole development agenda, people who have skills, people who have talent. So we're seeing political parties trying to field the candidates who try to fit this bill. Now, competence there, we're looking at organizational leadership, the ability to lead an organization like a government department, a municipality, a state-owned entity. Public leadership there refers to a person's ability to interact with members of the public, the stakeholder communities. And then the third point there looks at personal leadership. It's all about the ability for self-management, where even if in the face of temptations for corruption, you remind yourself of the 4 agreements, that is the contract that you have with yourself, that leadership, Mandela would say, is about triumph over temptation. There is a lot of things that are tempting people in the public service, money and all that. But good leadership is the leadership that will always prevail and triumph over temptation, on understanding that this is not my money, it's the money that belongs to the public. So that's what we call personal leadership. So we're seeing these debates actually being surfaced by quite a number of players in preparation for the new order after the May elections, as to whether this is the type of leadership that would deliver South Africa from where it is right now. It is not a lost cause or a lost case. There is potential for improvement. So what we're saying here is that people are calling for visionary thinking, the type of leadership that they would like to see emerge out of this forthcoming elections is a visionary leadership that is defined by adaptability and resilience. And then again, also the leadership that is comfortable with collaboration and inclusivity. And then again, that is also ethical and taking responsibility. The leadership that is defined by emotional intelligence and empathy. And I would like to drop my anchor right here and thank you very much. Thank you, Robin.
And thank you very much, Johnny.
Yes.
So